It was a dark, silent night in the middle of nowhere. I had been visiting my grandmother, who lived in a remote area, on the edge of a secluded lake. Her small house was surrounded by a vast forest, and reaching it required a long drive down a narrow, dirt road that seemed to stretch forever. There were no neighbors, with the closest houses at least a mile or two away. The quiet and isolation of this place always made it feel like stepping into a different world. When removed from the constant hum of city life, whenever I visited, I would always stay overnight in her guest bedroom. Driving through those long, lonely roads late at night wasn't something I wanted to do. After a full day of catching up with my grandmother, this night in particular felt different. Though there was an eeriness in the air, the kind of feeling that makes you glance over your shoulder, even when you're certain you're alone. The sun had long set, and the stillness of the lake under the moonlight was both beautiful and unsettling. My grandmother had already gone to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As I relaxed on her back patio, scrolling through my phone and listening to music. Around midnight, as the night settled in, I began to hear a faint noise, a strange clanking up, banging sound, seemingly coming from the direction of the boathouse. At first I brushed it off, thinking it was just the wind rattling something by the lake. But the sounds continued, persistent and unnerving, as if someone was deliberately creating them. Moments later, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a quick flash of light down by the dock, near the boathouse. My heart began to race, as I strained to see if I could spot any movement. In the darkness, a creeping sense of dread started to build within me. We were so isolated out here that no one else should be around, let alone wandering down by the dock. I considered calling the police, but quickly realized it would take them over an hour to reach us. Instead, I decided to investigate on my own. I turned off my music, went inside quietly, and reached for my grandmother's revolver, which I knew she kept in a drawer for emergencies. Feeling the cold weight of the gun in my hand made the reality of the situation sink in even more. I had never had to use a weapon before, and I hoped I wouldn't have to now. Returning to the patio, I scanned the area near the boathouse. My heart pounded as I saw the silhouette of someone slowly moving near the dock, the faint light occasionally flickering, revealing their shadowy form. Summoning my courage, I called out, demanding that they stop and reveal themselves. To my surprise, a tall, slender man stepped into view. He didn't respond to my shouts, didn't react with fear, and simply started walking towards me, completely calm, as if he had every right to be there. The man's features became clearer as he moved closer, illuminated by the faint light from the house. He looked old, with a gaunt face and hollow eyes that seemed unfocused, as if he were in some sort of trance. His casual, silent approach felt deeply unsettling. I shouted again, ordering him to leave the property, warning that I was armed. But he just kept advancing. Slow and deliberate, my nerves got the best of me, and I fired a warning shot over his head, the loud crack of the gun echoing across the still lake. At last he stopped, raising his hands in a strangely relaxed manner, as though the sound hadn't fazed him. The man finally spoke, his voice oddly calm, telling me to take it easy. There was something about the way he said it that sent chills down my spine. I demanded again that he leave immediately, but after a few tense moments, he slowly turned and walked back toward the woods, disappearing into the shadows. I spent the rest of the night on high alert, barely able to sleep, half expecting him to return the next morning. I warned my grandmother about the encounter, and though she tried to reassure me, I could tell she was unnerved. 2 years passed, but the memory of that night still haunted me. I was living in the countryside of Ireland by then, far removed from my grandmother's lakeside home, but a different eerie experience awaited me there. Living alone in a quiet cottage, I had grown used to the solitude. The nights were mostly silent, with only the occasional rustle of leaves, a distant bark of a neighbor's dog. But one night, as I got up around midnight to grab a snack from the kitchen, I began to hear strange noises outside. At first I thought it might be an animal, but the sound grew louder and more unsettling. It was an odd scraping noise, like metal against metal, mixed with an eerie croaking sound. I opened the window slightly, hoping to see what was causing it. My dog stood at the back door, her eyes fixed on the forest behind the house. She wasn't barking, which was unusual for her. Instead, she looked tense, unfocused. As I listened, the noise moved from the back of the house to the front, like something was circling the property. The persistent scraping and the silence of my normally vocal dog made my skin crawl. I quickly closed the curtains, hoping whatever it was would just go away. But then I heard a soft tap on my window. At first it was gentle, barely audible, but it soon became a steady tapping sound, like stones being thrown against the glass. I lay in bed, frozen, listening to the relentless tapping. It continued for what felt like an eternity, before it finally stopped. The next morning, I told my neighbors about the experience, only to learn that a man with a criminal background had recently moved into the area. A few weeks later, he disappeared, after a massive drug stash was found in a nearby shed, adding an unsettling context to that night. Years later, another strange encounter awaited me during a visit to Oregon. I was staying with friends on their secluded property, a vast 300-acre expanse surrounded by dense forest. One evening, as we sat around a fire pit, I became captivated by the sight of a large, hand-like shape gripping a tree trunk in the distance. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but when my friend Anthony noticed it too, we both grew tense. The hand was massive, its thick, bark-like fingers wrapped around the tree in an almost unnatural way. We watched it for several minutes, barely breathing, until it finally withdrew behind the tree and vanished into the forest. Later that night, we decided to investigate, hoping to find some rational explanation. When we reached the tree, there were no footprints or signs that anything had been there. The ground was undisturbed, adding to the eerie mystery of the encounter. To this day, I can't explain what we saw, but that massive hand remains etched in my memory. My experiences didn't end there. As a teenager, my family moved to a quiet part of England, near an old castle called Barry Pomeroy. Locals warned us that the castle was haunted, but I was skeptical. One summer night, my friends and I decided to explore the castle. We climbed over a wall and wandered through the ruins, eventually descending into the dungeon. To our surprise, we found freshly lit candles arranged in a circle, with strange symbols drawn on the walls. An uneasy feeling washed over us, and we decided to leave. As we made our way out, I saw a shadowy figure on the ramparts watching us. I thought it was my friend, Alan, only to realize moments later that he was standing right next to me, The figure didn't move for a moment, before slipping behind a pillar and vanishing. As we hurried away from the castle, I glanced back and saw a faint, blue light drifting along the walls, disappearing into the darkness. That was the first and last time I experienced something so unexplainable. I couldn't shake the image of that blue light, and I began to believe that the legends about the castle might be true. One of my final, most chilling experiences occurred one winter night in Canada. When I was about 13, I was soaking in our hot tub on the deck, surrounded by a thick blanket of snow. The world was quiet, and the only sounds were the gentle rustling of the trees and the occasional crack of snow underfoot. Suddenly, a massive wolf appeared at the edge of the property, its silver fur glistening in the moonlight, and its piercing green eyes locked onto me. I froze, terrified, yet mesmerized by the sight. The wolf prowled along the fence, eventually making its way toward the barn, where our horses were kept. As it moved, its shape began to shift, becoming larger and more human, like I watched in horrors. It morphed into a tall, broad-shouldered figure standing at least 7 feet tall. The figure vanished behind the barn, leaving me questioning if I had seen something supernatural. Later I learned my brother had seen the same wolf, adding a haunting validation to my encounter. These experiences, scattered across different places and times, have left an indelible mark on me. Each event felt like a brush with something beyond the ordinary, something that lurks in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I still don't have answers for what I saw or heard, but those memories remain vivid, a reminder of the mysteries that linger in the world's forgotten, isolated corners.